So good afternoon, my name is Verónica Rivera-Pelayo and I'm working at the FZI Research Center for Information Technologies, and it's a pleasure for me to present you our work on applying quantified self-approaches to support reflective learning. So first, a brief overview of my presentation. I will introduce you to the project where our work is carried on. What is the background of our work? So first, from a theoretical point of view, and then from a pragmatical point of view, the motivation of our work, and then I will present you the framework itself, so a framework to apply quantified self-approaches to support reflective learning, and the three dimensions that are part of it: tracking cues, triggering, and recalling and revisiting experiences. And finally, the conclusions of our work. So as I said, I will start with Mirror, Reflective Learning at Work. This is a European project with 15 partners, and we are aiming to support learners at work, so learning on the job, and how they can learn by observing others and from their own experiences. So here, collected data has a main role, and they can learn by reflection on this data that we are collecting. And the result, the last result of the project will be a bunch of applications which will be able to be personalized for the users, and they will interact so that, for example, a user can have an application to capture data and other applications to visualize data or to directly conduct a reflection session. So what's reflective learning in our work? There are several definitions of reflective learning. We have the reflective model of Baud, Keogh, and Walker, and this is the definition we are having in our work. And it means, for us, reflective learning means returning to an evaluated past work and personal experience in order to promote continuous learning and improve future experiences. So why we choose this model? So, as I said, there are other models, but this model defines how the complex cognitive process takes place, so all the phases that are taking place, we can say, in our heads, and it's context independent. That means that we can use this model in any context that we would like to. Let's have a look at the model. So we have the base of reflective learning and the experiences themselves. So these experiences are made of behavior, ideas, and feelings, and they feed to the reflective process, just in the middle, which is formed of three phases. The first phase is returning to the experience. The second phase is attending to the feelings of this experience and utilizing positive feelings and removing the negative feelings. And finally, in a third phase, we reevaluate this experience in order to get a result, to get what we call an outcome. And an outcome of the reflection process could be a new perspective on experience, a change in behavior, or, for example, a commitment to action. So this was the theoretical background. Let's see now the practical, pragmatical background of our work. So the Quantified Self community, maybe some of you already know this community, is a group of users and tool makers who are using and developing all kinds of tools in order to collect personally relevant information. So this will allow them to gain self-knowledge about their experiences, their behaviors, their habits, and thoughts. So let's see three examples. The first one is MoodScope. It's a web-based application which allows users to track their mood through a game based on cards, so a card game. A second example would be Rescue Time, which tracks which applications we are using in our laptops and which websites we are visiting. So this way, they give you feedback about your productivity and your efficiency, and they compare you to the average users that are in this tool. And finally, a third example is Nike Plus. So a part of Nike Plus is a sensor that you can wear in your training shoes, and then you can count calories, kilometers, and so on. So it's oriented to sport and health. So with the combination of reflective learning and quantified self-tools, we concretize a vision of learning analytics for a particular model of informal learning and for a particular class of support tools. This way, we want to show too that learning analytics can be used beyond classrooms and in our daily lives. So quantified self-tools, so this community, they are already being successful. They are already learning a lot about themselves. And then we have thought that these benefits could be used for learning processes too. Some of these benefits are, for example, a rich source of data, the awareness augmentation for the learners, the analysis of the data that these tools can make, and finally, quantification of abstract measures, for example, emotions. So let's have a look at the framework itself. So first we have this theory, this cognitive process, and secondly we have the quantified self, these tools that come from an experimentation of several users. Then we made a model analysis and we tried to research which information needs do this model have. And then by surveying several quantified self tools that are already available, we tried to see which support dimensions we could have for reflective learning. And we identified 3 dimensions. So we have the first dimension is tracking cues, the second dimension is triggering, and the third dimension is recalling and revisiting experiences. So let's see these 3 dimensions. The first one, tracking cues. Tracking cues means, on the one hand, tracking these experiences, so which aspects form an experience, these behavior, ideas, and feelings. And on the other hand, we can track the outcomes too. So these outcomes, these results of reflective process, can serve for future learning processes as a source of information, a source of experiences. And here, we define 3 aspects. First of all, how we are tracking this data. So this tracking means we can use software sensors. That's what we say they could be applications which are web-based, desktop-based, or mobile applications which allow users to track experiences which are not directly measurable. For example, in this mood scope where you can track your mood. And we have, as a second category, the hardware sensors, which are just devices which allow you to capture automatically any data. These are normally more expensive than the software sensors and therefore a very different category of tracking means. In this example, we could see the Nike Plus. Then the core of the tracking cues is actually what we are tracking. So what is the tracked aspect and object? And here we define a categorization of 4 parts. So first of all, the emotional aspects. We can track mood, stress, interest. Secondly, data from private and work processes. For example, our browser history, our photos. In third place, we have the physiological data. We can track, for example, asthma attacks or heart rate. So any data, any aspect that has something to do with our health and with physical activity. And finally, general activity, where we can have from number of cigarettes till hours spent in a certain activity, for example, at work. And finally, the third aspect of tracking cues is the purpose. So which is the goal that the user is trying to achieve by tracking this data and using one of these tools. So the second dimension of the framework is triggering. So trigger means to start the reflective process itself. So normally this start takes place when there is a discrepancy between what we perceive from an experience, so what is our perception, and what actually really happened. And this mismatch can trigger reflective processes. Here, from the technical point of view of quantified self tools, we can define 2 kinds of triggering. First one is active triggering. In this case, there is the tool that makes a notification or catches the attention of the user by sending, for example, an email or doing something explicitly. This is the case of rescue time. They send you weekly an email and they tell you your efficiency was this X%, and the average user had this other percentage of efficiency or productivity. And we have a second category, which is the passive triggering. That means that the tool doesn't perform any analysis on the data in order to detect these experiences which they should prompt to you, but they just show you the data in an appropriate way so that the user can start this learning process. And usually, so this triggering takes place outside of the system itself. So this would be the case of Daytime. So Daytime is a web-based application where you can just introduce your data and it's visualized. In this example, you can see someone introduced how many times she had been in many cities, so London, Athens, Amsterdam, and then she could visualize the data. And there you can enter any data you want. And the third and final dimension, recalling and revisiting experiences. In this dimension, we aim to enrich and visualize the data as well as share it in order to form an experience and show it to the user in a more meaningful way. So here we have defined 4 sub-dimensions. The first one is contextualizing. So we can contextualize the data we are capturing with other data. For example, social context. So establishing relationships between our data and the data of others may be very meaningful for the user, or comparing ourselves with others. This is the case, once again, of rescue time, where you get this comparison with the other users. You can have a special context. So where were you when this data was captured? And this may give a meaning to the experience itself. Then we have historical context. For reflection, it's very important to see the trend of the data and the evolution of the data. And finally, we have item metadata and context from other data sets. Regarding item metadata, it could be, for example, if we track what we are eating, how many calories does a product have. Or in the context from other data sets, there are already many data sets available, and we could consider, for example, weather or work schedule. The other 3 dimensions of recalling and revisiting are in these slides. The second is data fusion. So this perspective that from the same experiences are very important to make them aware, so to make the user aware of these different perspectives. So here then we can consider the data fusion from an objective point of view. That would be the data that comes from a device, from a sensor, for example. Then the self-reported data, so data that the user has indicated. Then the peer fusion, this would be when we are compared with, so we have a comparison between 2 individuals, or the group data, so the group perspective. We can aggregate the data and compare ourselves to the rest of the users. Then the data analysis. Here is the most important part maybe for learning analytics. Here we can consider aggregation, averages. Aggregation, it could be done from a formal point of view, for example, a tag cloud, from a mathematical point of view, or from a visualization point of view. And there I come to the last point of recalling and revisiting experiences, and it's the visualization, which has a main role because with these visualizations, we will give a meaning to the data and make the user understand what this data means. But at the same time, we will have an impact on the user acceptance on these tools. If they like the visualizations, if they understand them, then they will use the tools and they will be motivated to capture more data. Yes, 3 examples quickly. The first one is from UbiFit. It's an application where you have a garden, and the more activity you do, physical activity, more sport, the more flowers you have. So this has this persuasive component too. In the center, you can see some histograms, and in the final visualization, it's what we call the mood map app. It's one application that we are developing now in Mirror, and you can express your mood by a bidimensional map of violence and arousal. Here we could have smiles, for example, too. And just to conclude my presentation, so I have shown you a framework for applying quantified self-tools to support reflective learning. This gives us an understanding on how could we design new tools in order to support reflective learning at work. And it has allowed us to have a structured review of this strand of research and detect which areas still are unclear for us and need further research. And our actual work is now designing and implementing new quantified self-tools, and in order to afterwards validate this framework and see how these tools can support reflective learning. And thank you very much, and if you have any questions, it will be a pleasure to answer you.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, so actually here are two different things. So the quantified self tools are used by many people, and they are aware that this data is being published. And some of them, they have the options in the tools to keep them private too. But what we are aiming to do is to use these principles of these tools and develop new tools which have to deal with the privacy problems at each company where we are going to apply our tools. That's why, for example, using these ideas of quantified self, we have developed this mood map app, and we are going to use it in a big telecommunication company, and then we have to adapt ourselves to their company. So data will remain in the company, and the data set will just be for them, not share with others. So the instances that we will actually use at work will deal with these privacy issues. But the examples I showed you are already there and are just uncontrolled, we could say. But it's the principles of these tools what we are using for new tools.
You see that's quite a complex set of tools.
Mm-hmm.
Do you see maybe some kind of hierarchy in your model that you think would be relevant to different kinds of workplaces or different kinds of workplace learning?
So not directly, for example, with context or categories at work, but my approach would be to these three dimensions to see which tool, so instantiate a tool, for example, say a tool in the tracking part does the work like this, use these means to track. For the recalling and revisiting dimension makes this approach or this odd approach and how it works. Then we will evaluate several scenarios, but we have not considered to make a big hierarchy about it. Still in the project we have 5 different contexts, so these will be for sure covered.
Okay, well thank you very much.
Thank you.